This video was developed by the Commemorative Air Force's Safety Office and the Marshalling Detachment and is designed to provide basic instruction in the CAF aircraft marshalling procedures for beginners and as a refresher training for experienced marshalers and pilots. Viewing this video is not designed to make you a qualified marshaler, but it will give you the basics that with practice will allow you to safely marshal aircraft at your facility for unit events such as normal operations, fly-ins, and open houses. For larger events such as air shows, experienced qualified marshalers should always be utilized, but you may be able to assist under the supervision of qualified marshalling personnel. Contact the CAF Marshalling Detachment for assistance. Because of a marshaler's high visibility during an event, we must constantly remind ourselves to be professional and courteous at all times because we represent the CAF at the event we happen to be working. Qualified members of the CAF Marshalling Detachment are dressed in orange shirts and black slacks to make them easily identifiable. When you're acting as a marshaler, you should have on an orange-colored vest to make you readily identifiable. This section of the video will demonstrate the basic CAF-approved marshalling hand signals required to direct an aircraft. The Marshalling Guidebook contains many additional hand signals that may also be needed. This marshaler. This marshaler. Proceed to the next marshaler. Proceed to the next marshaler. Move forward. Move forward. Turn to the left. Turn to the left. Turn to the right. Turn to the right. Tight turn. Tight turn. Slow down. Slow down. Stop. Stop. CHOCKS out. CHOCKS out. Start engine. Start engine. Start engine. Prime up. Prime down. Fire in engine. Fire in engine. Cut engine. Cut engine. Abandon aircraft. Abandon aircraft. The next portion of this video will introduce marshalling procedures utilizing these and other approved hand signals. By the end of this video, you will have been shown how to control the movement of aircraft on the ramp using CAF-approved marshalling hand signals and to recognize the inherent dangers in ramp operations and plan ways to minimize them. The basic function of a marshaler is to control movement of aircraft prior to and after flight. Marshalling is performed mainly on the ramp at the airport or on the ramp of a wing or squadron hangar. This function is accomplished by using CAF-approved marshalling hand signals while exercising due care and ensuring that the movement area is clear of vehicular and pedestrian traffic. One key thing to remember during marshalling is that the aircraft commander is ultimately responsible for the movement of the aircraft. As you approach the aircraft you are going to marshal, look around, under, and behind the aircraft for anything that might be a potential hazard either to the aircraft or to personnel behind the aircraft. Check for the fire guard or extinguisher. Look over the aircraft for leaking fuel, oil, or hydraulic fluid. Check for open compartments and loose panels, pitot tube covers, or control surface locks. Do a 360-degree check to ensure civilians and ground crew are out of the way and prepare to start the engine. Assume your position in front of the left wing and out of the propeller line. This places you on the pilot's left or throttle side. Depending on the type of aircraft and planned movement of the aircraft, you can also position yourself on the opposite wing. If the aircraft has a side-by-side configuration for the pilot in command and second in command, you must be on the left wing unless the pilot in command instructs otherwise. Remember, if you cannot see the pilot, then he cannot see you. Make sure you are far enough to the side to be clearly visible to the pilot. The distance needed to have eye contact with the pilot can depend on the type and size of the aircraft. It can also be affected by whether or not the wings on the specific aircraft fold, and if they are folded or not. The larger the aircraft, such as the B-29 or B-17, the further away you may need to be so you can direct the aircraft without having to walk or marshal backwards. Make eye contact with the pilot and signal CHOCKS out. If chocks are left in during start, extreme care must be taken when removing the chocks from a running aircraft to avoid the prop. Stay in physical contact with the wing as you go in and as you come back out with the chocks. Give the pilot the signal indicating he is clear to start the engine. Extend your left arm to at least head height with the thumb up to indicate clear to start with no visible prime. If prime becomes visible, dripping liquids, then invert the thumb on the left hand to indicate so. Make small circles with your vertically extended right arm and hand to indicate rotate prop or crank engine. You need not continue the circling motion during the entire cranking process. However, the prime indication needs to continue until the engine has engaged. If there is a stack fire during the startup, indicate the situation to the pilot. The pilot should continue to start the engine, and the fire typically goes out at that time. In the unlikely event a stack fire gets out of control or another issue arises that would require the pilot to evacuate the aircraft, use the evacuate signal. Once the engine has been successfully started, raise the hands and give the signal to move forward. If the pilot has a question or problem at any time, he may stop the aircraft and motion for the marshaller to approach the aircraft. For a normal turn, indicate which wing to bring forward depending on which way you want the aircraft to turn. After the aircraft is moved out of its slot and onto the taxiway, pass it off to the next marshaller. Do not marshal walking backwards. If you are the marshaller who is to take control, do not raise your hand to signal "I am your marshaller" until after the aircraft has been officially passed to you. The next portion of this video will demonstrate recovering an aircraft and directing it into its designated parking space. You must ensure that you have sufficient space to park any incoming aircraft, so you must know what type of aircraft you are recovering ahead of time so you can select a parking place for it to fit in. Allow for empty space between aircraft. A good rule of thumb is to allow 6 to 10 feet of additional space for wingtip clearance, if the ramp allows. To determine the proper spacing, you can use the Marshalling Stride Guide provided in the Marshalling Detachment Training Manual. If your pace span is 36 inches, use paces to step off the area being measured. Now use the Stride Guide as follows. You'll find that a T6 wingspan is 42 feet, which is 14 paces with a 36-inch pace span plus 2 paces on each side for the wingtip clearance of 6 to 12 feet. This makes a total of 18 paces. To find the center point for the nose, divide by 2 and you'll need to take 9 paces. Start at the wingtip of the aircraft next to the parking space and take 8 paces, and this is where you want the nose to be. When recovering an aircraft, make eye contact with the pilot. Pat your head and point to the pilot, indicating to him that "I am your marshaller." If a pilot appears to be taxiing too fast, or you want him to slow down for whatever reason, signal him to slow down. It may be necessary to station marshallers along the pathway the aircraft will take to get to its parking space. As the aircraft passes each marshaller, hand the plane off to the next person. Do not indicate yourself as the marshaller until the previous marshaller has formally handed over control to you. Each marshaller handling or receiving the aircraft should notify the pilot when he is the marshaller. When the aircraft is in a position that the pilot can see you, pat your head and hold your other arm straight up, indicating to him, "I am your marshaller." As the aircraft gets close to the parking space, indicate where you want the aircraft nose to be. Stand at the point you determined earlier for the nose position. Allow the pilot to continue his taxi toward the desired position. If he does not begin a turn to move into the space, you will need to instruct him to turn. As he begins to turn, you will need to move to ensure you remain in eye contact with the pilot. You also need to be aware of any potential conflicts to ensure wingtips do not hit anything. It may be necessary for you to move to the outside of the turn. If you begin your move while the pilot is carefully watching, He will understand when you disappear from that view to appear on the other side of the aircraft. If there is no conflict issue with wingtip clearance, you should remain on the inside of the turn to maintain eye contact with the pilot. If there is potential wingtip clearance conflict on both sides and there's no one else to assist in watching wingtips, you can stop the aircraft to check the opposite side, then return to have the pilot resume movement. For larger aircraft, try to avoid stopping during a turn, as it is difficult for them to continue a turn from a stop. If you have a wing watcher while parking an aircraft, that watcher should be providing you, the marshaller, not the pilot, with information about wingtip clearance. A simple thumbs up is not very informative. The preferred signal would be to use both arms and show the distance between the wing and the obstruction. The distance needs to be directed to the marshaller handling the aircraft so they can adjust the movement as needed. The speed of your hand signals also serves to advise the pilot how fast or how slow you wish them to move. The closer you get to the final position, the slower your hand signals should be. Try to ensure the tail wheel is straight when the aircraft is in the final position. When you have the aircraft in the correct position, signal a stop, brake, and shutdown to the pilot. Be aware that a stack fire is still a possibility, so watch for that problem. Remember, this CAF marshalling video is not intended to make you a qualified marshaller. It is intended to provide basic marshalling training for beginners and refresher training for qualified marshallers and pilots.